Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today I thought I'd do something a bit different. I saw this video on AI featuring the Primeagen from the Lemonade stand, and I thought I'd react to it since I have a bit of expertise in that area. All right, let's get into it.
I got a larger question here then, because here's the thing. From the outside, I'm looking at it from like a financial POV, and we're seeing that the LLMs are kind of leveling off, as you say, in terms of like exponential, feeling like magic.
4 to 5 was not nearly
4
as
to 5 wasn't as
magical.
big as 0 to 3, right? And yet the spending has gone the other way. It's exponentially up. We're spending more than ever. They're demanding more than ever. They're promising, $1 trillion to NVIDIA, to Oracle, to Broadcom. And so that's a disconnect that has to be solved eventually, right? When I look at its use cases in like English or writing, or it's still so slop and I don't see revenue generated. But people always tell me that it's really useful in programming. And I don't understand it. I don't know that case. So I want to know, boots on the ground, what you're seeing from LLMs and AI in general in terms of making programming more productive. Can you hire less people? Can they work twice as hard? Like what's happening there that is making it so valuable in that space?
First, I want to hear Doug's opinion on this, and I'm going to look something.
So from what they kind of mentioned initially, I think there has been a big, maybe awakening moment for a lot of people, like regarding LLMs and just like the improvement. Because from ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT GPT 4, we saw a huge improvement, as Atrox kind of mentioned there, and we saw some of like the metrics in the tests showing how much better ChatGPT 4 is than ChatGPT 3. But in exchange for that improvement, we also saw increased costs being spent from the developers like OpenAI or Anthropic, or Google with Gemini and other creators. But the money they spent is kind of a diminishing return. Like we spent a couple, like 100 billion to create ChatGPT 3. I don't even think it's 100 billion. It's a couple, like maybe 10, 15 billion. I'm not sure exact numbers off my head, so don't quote me on it. We spent several billion just to create ChatGPT 3. And then we went from ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. And that was like another couple billion. But now to go from ChatGPT 5, which was several billion in itself, I think like 20 or 30 billion just to create that. But the improvement from ChatGPT 4 to ChatGPT 5 was minuscule compared to ChatGPT 3 and 4. And yet the spending was like several times increased. So the question is, in order to go from ChatGPT 4 or ChatGPT 5 to ChatGPT 6, how much more spending? And I think it's Sam Altman said that they need about $1 trillion to really make AGI, which I'm not sure if that spending can be justified or even if they'll reach it with that money. But we do see that $100 billion has been given to OpenAI for GPUs from NVIDIA. But the crazy thing that they're going to be spending that money back to NVIDIA. So it's like a circle there, like just transferring money back between each other. So how much money is being spent is a big question that many people are interested in. And how can we justify that spending? Which is what I think they're trying to talk about now. But they also mentioned, I guess they're going into it now, programming and the effects on programming. So let's just take a moment to talk about that.
Yeah, while you do that.
To kind of answer that, I'm going to give your opinion, but in tweet form.
Okay,
Perry,
I love
can
this.
you pull this up? So famously, this is what, 2 years ago, something like that?
No, this was in March.
Oh, this is March of this year. Okay.
This is March this year.
So the CEO of Anthropic said that in 6 months, AI will be writing 90% of code. Oh, and then there's another couple quotes about AI stealing your programming jobs in 6 months, right?
Yes.
That was the original one.
Oh, we are 11 months. Oh.
So we are 11 months into 6 months away from AI stealing your programming jobs.
That was in 2024.
Yeah, that was a year and a half ago. Prime, we are 15 months into 6 months away from AI stealing your programming jobs. Okay, a few months ago. We're 28 months into 6 months from AI taking your jobs. We're also 4 months into 24 months until Cursor is obsolete, because that was also predicted by people. And we're 6 months into 6 months until AI writes 90% of your code. Right, okay, this is the Anthropic
So
one.
is AI writing 90% of your code?
Well,
Okay, so quick thing to that. I love this like section about like how we're a couple months away from AI taking everybody's jobs and we're programmers or whatever. Because I'm a programmer. I work as a programmer full time is my job. But what I love is it kind of reminds me of when Elon was saying that we're 2 years or a year away from full self-driving, and in like 2015 or 2017, like full self-driving will be out by the end of the year. We've been like 2 years or a year away from self-driving for the last like 15 years. So we do have a lot of progress being made in things like AI, or even like with self-driving. That is technically AI as well. But I think the amount of progress that's being made has been kind of over. Like we've definitely seen more progress than we initially expected. I think nobody would have expected, if you asked me like 5 years ago, where we would have AI like ChatGPT now. I think not many people expected that. But then a lot of people who expected that, oh, by the time we're in now or in the near future, we'll have so much more higher advancements. And we've kind of seen an under delivery of that. And I think people just kind of need to maybe lower their expectations a bit, because the more higher the expectations are, the more people will be disappointed when those expectations aren't met, or when the goalpost keeps being shifted, because instead of, oh, we're going to have AI this year or AGI this year, we'll have it 5 years from now or like next year or whatever. And that goalpost will keep shifting, which will also lead people to be more disappointed and kind of disillusioned with AI. But let's get further into the video.
So the most recent update, we're now 29 months into 6 months from AI taking your job. And Andre Karpathy just said it feels like the AI industry is slop. My own experience is I think...
Well, specifically, he says, I like the industry is trying to pretend that this current AI is amazing, and it's not, it's slop.
Yeah, this was this past week.
There's words in between that I took out because he did a little bit of more talking, but that's the gist.
Okay.
So you can see. I want people to see that because, I did some editorial thing right there. Because he said, the industry...
The opposite, you just cut it down.
Yeah, exactly. I went dude super hard on the news there.
So I think this is a funny meme where people have been hyping up the software thing insanely, right? You have investors or startup guys who are like, all of coding will be taken over by AIs in the next 3. And you hear this constantly. And that is not true. And I know you also feel that is not true. Certainly from my experience, though. So, I mean, I think I am like a solid intermediate level programmer, let's say, where I have the background, some industry experience, and I use it in my daily life. Whereas your audience, Prime, is speaking to the people who are deep in the sauce. So I think you have the higher kind of value audience that a lot of these companies are shooting for. In the intermediate band that I'm in, it's incredible, right? And so an app like Cursor, which you've worked with a bunch, is truly magic for me. It has accelerated the rate at which I can make things by, let's say, 10x. Like literally, I make 10 times the amount of stuff that I did before. So for me, and this is, again, one of the reasons why I'm optimistic about these things, is because for my concrete job right now, it makes it way, 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 way better, and I pay $20 a month.
Yes.
But then let's scale up to like real professionals, which is your experience and audience.
Yes. So first off, I want to show this tweet right here that I have pulled up. So if you can do this. By the way, I've been blocked by Paul Graham because he made this tweet that said, what's something 1 million people are using that in 10 years, 15 billion people or some big number will be using. And of course I responded to your mom, and then I just learned you can't make that joke, Paul Graham. Okay. So anyone looking to make a your mom joke, don't do that. It'll get you instantly blocked. So this is kind of on the hype side of things, right? I met a founder today who said he writes 10,000 lines of code a day now thanks to AI. This is probably the limit.
Okay. 10,000 lines of code a day, according to AI, is ridiculous. I think, if we're looking like to my experience, so back when I was in college, right, I had a professor who had years of industry knowledge and actually worked with several big companies. And he mentioned IBM. I think it was IBM back in the day was like, they expect their developers to write 10 or 20 lines of code a day, because they said that they want every line of code they write to be, in essence, perfect. And if you're writing 10,000 lines of code, I don't think there's any way you can properly test every single line of code to make sure that is being like, it's a quality code being written and not just slop that 6 months or a year from now will break. So 10,000 lines of code is really ridiculous. And it's just AI slop at that point. Like there isn't quality putting in, there isn't making sure it's the best practices or following a proper structure or even testing. There's definitely tons of bugs in there if you're writing 10,000 lines of code a day. I mean, even professionally, like at work with like several teams, I think we have several teams, like 4 or 5 teams working on a certain product. We are not writing 10,000 lines of code in a month even, but for a single developer to write that much code in a day, it's questionable. So yeah, I don't think it's the best code, or I think it's just pumping out AI slot. But let's continue with the video.
He's a hotshot programmer. He knows AI tools very well, and he's talking about 12-hour days. He's not naive. This is not 10,000 lines of bug-filled crap, right? So you can see that people are super stoked about AI.
I'm stoked. Reading this tweet, I'm stoked.
Dude, I know. I feel
Clearly,
like a NASCAR
AI
driver.
is going to solve all our problems. I can feel it.
But how does Paul know it's not bug-filled crap?
Well, because he said
Because it is bug filled.
It's in the tweet.
Duh.
Maybe let's reread the tweet, Prime. I feel like you didn't see
I guess I
it.
didn't read it. I'm sorry.
And it's Paul Graham, who's a famous technologist.
He has a check mark.
Yeah.
He couldn't say this is not unless he knew.
That's true. No one has ever done that. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, you see these tweets all the time. And I think it blackpills so many people that are trying to learn technology. And I think it kind of like makes the world seem so complex that no one ever could really jump into it. And it's not really worth it. And it's just like, there's the smart people that know how to do it. And I'm never going to do this, right? I'm too dumb to do 10,000 lines of code a day. Okay. I can't do 10,000 anythings a day. So that is just out of control. So when I see this, it just makes me feel bad because people think it's just like the greatest thing that has ever existed. And I think for your use cases, and I do this also, smaller.
If you're looking into getting into software development stuff, don't think you have to write 10,000 lines of code. I think that's what Prime is saying here. But realistically, you don't have to write that much code. In fact, if you're writing even just 10 lines of code, those 10 lines of code are quality and like are actually good lines of code that aren't filled with bugs or just AI slop and are maybe even more efficient than what's normally done, you will be like star. Like I know people who can't do that. So don't have to write 10,000 lines of code a day. That's very unrealistic. Just little input there.
Projects or like kind of like mid-sized ones, you can just rip through really quickly because you're not there to be like, I'm going to maintain this with 5 different people. It's just like, no, I need to
10
have
years or
yeah,
something.
I'm just making this thing, and I
was gonna
don't
play that
like
back
it
to
is
you.
not a
Because that was
smaller
really-
projects or like kind of it's just like the greatest thing that has ever existed. And I think for your use cases, and I do this also, smaller projects or like kind of like mid-sized ones, you can just rip through really quickly because you're not there to be like, I'm going to maintain this with 5 different people. It's just like, no, I need to
10
have
years or
yeah,
something.
I'm just making this thing, and I don't like it is not a long-term thing. And if I need to, I'll just tear it down and do it again in a day. It is so good. I've used it so many times that way. But like a long-term project, it's really hard. You cannot do this in a long-term project. The reason being is that the best way to describe it is that
I was gonna pause there for a second. I actually like what Prime said there a lot. I think a huge use case of AI currently for, let's just say, normies who aren't software developers or don't do this professionally is writing little small apps for their small projects they need to be done or their little tasks they need finished. Like, for example, my wife at work, she needed just a sorting a list of stuff, right? So what she did is ask ChatGPT, how can I do this certain thing in Excel? How can I make this list? And ChatGPT gave her some VB basic code, VBA code. That's Visual Basic. That's the language that Excel uses under the hood for everything. And you can make scripts using it. So it gave her a script to use, just pasted that into her thing, and then boom, it was sorted. The list was sorted. It was organized the way she wanted. So I think a lot of people are doing similar things with AI. So I guess necessarily you don't need a professional or even good code as long as it gets the job done. Not exactly what, like not necessarily has to be industry standard. So I do think that's a huge use case for AI. Let's get back into what Prime was saying.
it's really hard. You cannot do this in a long-term project. The reason being is that the best way to describe it is that there's a bunch of human conventions or a way you kind of think about how you organize your data that there's most significant to least significant, kind of like what is important to have in certain ordering. LLMs don't have that kind of thought process. We call it, they cannot decrease entropy. They just simply go, okay, I'll fix it, put it right here. And they just inline everything. And when I use an AI long enough, I'll say, hey, let's make this change. It makes the same change in like 5 different spots. And as that surface area grows, the more danger of just like bugs in your code, because then you have to have the same instructions over and over and over again. And so if you're not the one correcting it and you're not the one interacting with it, it's just going to slowly degrade into just craziness. I've hooked up Twitch chat to Devin, which is one of these kind of automated programs, and just let them go for 8 hours to see what they build. And just like the code is just terrifying. It's just like at the end of it, you're like, what? There's just like for loops. You don't know about those. Doug never taught you about them, but they exist. Okay. They're not government drones. And you go through it and it's just like nonsense.
Dude, when you say terrifying though, is it terrifying as in like indecipherable to humans or terrifying as in it doesn't work?
Yes. Like the problem is that it'll just like, one of them was a update function, and the first thing it did, for those that do game development, the first thing it did is organize by Z index, which is how far away. Usually you do that in in rendering theoretically, where you want to render stuff over the top of each other, so that way you get, you don't have something in the back rendering on top of something else. It just did that in an update function, and then never touched it again or did anything. It just is doing work, because at one point that's how it was, and so it just didn't change that code, because why would I change that code? That code's already there. You told me to add like some key input. Why would I ever change stuff, right? So it just keeps on adding. Keep on adding.
Another way to so I think somebody who
That's a good point that Prime just made there. He said that AI just keeps on adding. It doesn't really review its code or look to see how the code is written already impacts everything else. And that's one thing I find happens a lot. Like when I'm playing around with on personal projects and stuff, I find the AI is very willing to create new functions or add more code. But you almost have to like push it to make fixes or improve the current code it has. So I think that's an issue if we are looking for AI adoption to do more programming jobs or take entry-level jobs. These AIs struggle with I don't know how to put it, but it's like revision. They don't really look and learn or aren't really introspective to see, okay, I made this function. Instead of creating a whole new structure, how can I improve existing structures to do the task I need? Which as a human developer or a junior or intermediate, more senior level developer will go back and be like, instead of creating a whole new function, or even junior developers will do this, instead of creating something new, how can I build on existing platforms, existing like components? But AIs tend to just keep building, keep adding, keep building, and they don't really think about whether even something they add will break something they already like have existing. But let's get back to the video.
Hasn't done professional industry software doesn't realize that I would say maybe 80 to 90% of the work, it's not writing the initial solution to a thing. It is actually updating it so that it works with all the other teams, with all the existing software, that you make sure there aren't bugs, that it's testable, that it's going to have all these issues. So that's why corporate programming, in my experience, not nearly as fun, because the majority of it is thinking about how does this interface with everything else going on? How do you make sure it's actually going to stick around and work?
Layman understanding here is that it lacks the ability to understand all the context that this has to be built within. in. It just wants to
that's a good-
dive at the problem
yes.
straightforward and solve the very short thing that you've fed or given it, but it doesn't understand all the systems and people it needs to work within and be efficient within.
Let's say you're designing a city, right? A big part of designing a city is thinking how all the pieces are going to interact with each other, right? And what an AI right now tends to do is if you say, okay, make the power plant, right? The center of power for the city. It'll go, cool, I'll just do that right now. And it's not going to think about how that's going to interface with all the other pieces. And to your example, later on, it might never go back and think, how does that power plant I made 6 months ago relate to the houses here and the commercial district here and the roads we're doing and the plumbing system? And so as this stuff gets built sort of independently from each other and there's no thought and oversight as to how it will scale, how it will interact, it just becomes this unmaintainable disaster that at some point you start over rather than trying to fix it. And
This is
that's
called tech debt, is my understanding.
Tech debt,
Okay.
yeah. And so there's a lot of thoughts on that, but there are
And that's a very actually really good point that they just made. That the AI just kind of dives at the problem. It doesn't really look at the whole structure, what we're really trying to solve here. It sees a short-term issue that, I want to maybe put a new button on the screen. So it writes the code for that button. But it doesn't realize that the button has to follow a specific maybe form for accessibility, to meet accessibility standards, or to follow a certain style that the company uses. Just solves a button. Here's a button on the screen. And so I think that's what a lot of actually companies are trying to improve the context for these AIs and the context windows. And that's why a lot of AIs will be like, oh, we have 1 million token context window. Because for a lot of these AIs, context is the big thing that drives them. The more context they have of the issue, the better they are at solving it. But when the AI is limited by the context or isn't even able to look at the context, they don't have knowledge of the code base or all the information, then they just tend to do whatever is in their training data instead of actually building the code or changing the code to meet the current standards or what you're actually trying to solve. And this can isn't really something, this can happen to humans as well, but isn't as big of an issue is because, like you said, in corporate programming, like professional programming, a lot of what you're doing is going through old code, reviewing documentation, and seeing how is what I'm building, how this new component I'm building, matching what we've already been doing, and how can I build on what we're already doing and follow those standards instead of just doing whatever I want. Because I can just write a code and write whatever I want, but I know when it's time to review that code or when my peers are looking at that code, they can be like, what the heck is this code? It matches nothing we're doing, which is what AI is pretty much doing. Like just writing whatever code. But anyways, back to the video. I'm just going to play back a bit for a second.
ways.
rather than trying to fix
Yes.
it. And that's
This is called tech debt, is my understanding.
Tech debt,
Okay.
yeah. And so there's a lot of thoughts on that, but there are ways to obviously mitigate this. You can handhold it, you can take more of your time, and there's like a lot of benefits to that. I'll give kind of a pro side of things, something maybe a +1 to the hypers that I think is really useful. So I'm in the middle of writing a small kind of just like fun game, and it has like 60, 70,000 lines of Lua in it. And so a small game, that'd be considered like a small game.
Okay.
And I wanted to add something. And so we go in there and I just asked the AI, hey, go at it. And there was like 5 different spots that had to make the change. And I looked at that and said, hey, here's something we haven't thought about. It's kind of screwed up. I'm now going to take this like AI's investigation, which would have taken me like 2 hours to figure out all the spots. Instead, did it for me in 5 minutes. Now I'm going to go home and think about it for like an hour and really come up with a more organized solution to this. And then that's great. So AIs can be really awesome because it can save me hours of research by just asking it questions to go search my code base, figure out how to do these things. And that's super useful because then I don't have to go play, Jean-Luc Picard and explore the galaxy.
Yeah.
Instead, it just does it for me.
I mean,
Actually, I love that because that's something I do all the time as well. But I kind of do it a different way. So if you don't know, ChatGPT has this new, it's kind of new, but it's been there for a little bit now. It's Codex. So Codex you can connect it to like your GitHub repository for your code. And then you can say, okay, Codex, on this, I think you can download it locally too, but I just use it on the ChatGPT Codex, whatever. And you say, okay, Codex, you have access to my repository. I want you to maybe go through the code and look for instances where I mention cats, for example. And whenever you see cats, I want you to change it to dogs, right? So now instead of me taking however long to figure out where all the cats are and make sure I have all the code, ChatGPT can go through that relatively quickly and make that change for me, which saves me some brain power where I can use to do something that's actually more challenging compared to just like going through code and fixing this tiny little thing. So it's great for research and making sure like your like small changes that aren't really as impactful or as breaking. So yeah, it saves a lot of time if you're trying to research or just understand your own code base better, an existing code base. It can help you a lot with that.
useful because then I don't have to go play, Jean-Luc Picard and explore the galaxy.
Yeah.
Instead, it just does it for me.
I mean, my connection there is the use that I've heard law firms talk about. It's like we've taken this process of having to dig through thousands and thousands of pages of writing about a case that somebody's working on, have the AI search for points instead, and you can at least eliminate that part and then have the human review the actual problem after the fact.
Yeah, I love it. I call it semantic searching. In other words, semantic usually means like the meaning of something. So it's like that search is awesome because old Google, you have to say it in a very descriptive way. Now you can say it like in a very prescriptive way where it's just, how does this make you feel? And it's going to like do stuff. So it's really cool in that kind of sense.
A question I have for you, I saw a clip where you're going on I would say a short rant where you said something funny. I want to code, I want to dance, and I don't want to go home. And you're in the midst of describing how this is automating or taking away a bit of the joy or the appeal of programming. It's servicing problems or answering and creating code is taking away some of the work that most people enjoy about coding or programming in the first place.
Yeah.
And now you're in a place where you're writing documentation more than anything, which is actually the part of the job that most programmers hate.
Yes.
And I wanted you to explain that a little bit and how that contrasts with what we're talking about right now.
I can put it in a non-programmer kind of way. Right now, like there's a huge push. You see it at least in some level of articles about game programming. They're like, AI image generation will just solve everything. It's just like, well, making the art and the style of the game, like that's part of the fun part. Like I want to have a feel to it.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just like, no, generate as fast as possible. And it doesn't have that same cohesion. It doesn't have that same kind of feel to it, that genuine.
That's very true. Like when I'm writing my own code, I have my style that I use. I have like the way I feel about code. Like you'll see a huge war for programmers is whether you have the curly base right beside the function or underneath it. But that's because each developer has their own style. It's not necessarily the code is good or bad. It's just unique. It's like how each person writes differently. We're all writing like English, for example, but we'll have our own different writing styles. But when you're using AI for that, it's more like almost like a generic writing style. It doesn't really have any feeling to it. Like code, a lot of people forget that code itself is a form of art. There's beautiful code for a reason because if someone writes really good code, it can be just as beautiful as like looking at a nice painting. So when you just have this generic like prints, like I don't know, like the Microsoft like corporate art style that's like kind of soulless. That's how it feels to have ChatGPT code when you're looking at the code it makes. It doesn't have that art to it. It doesn't have like that elegance. But then if you have human code, you can see, oh, I see like my coworker did this a certain way. I never thought of doing it that way. That's a really interesting style. They're doing things. And then I write code a different way. I'm like, oh, that's interesting style when they see my code. But when we have ChatGPT generic code, it doesn't, you don't have that same feeling that like, wow, that's a cool style. It's just like a boilerplate, seeing it on Stack Overflow kind of code. But anyways, that's just me yapping.
Like, no, generate as fast as possible. And it doesn't have that same cohesion. It doesn't have that same kind of feel to it, that genuine, like you can see the expression of the artist in the game. And so it's the exact same thing where instead of doing the work that's fun and creative and actually takes like time and thought, you're instead just writing the documentation of how it should be. You're just constantly, that's all it is. It's like somehow in this AI world, we were promised that it was going to cure cancer and fold our laundry. Instead, it's doing all of our art and all of our creative projects, and we're just having cancer and folding laundry. It's like, what the hell's happened here? Where's this trade-off? And so that's kind of the idea of the rant is I never realized I've been tricked into writing documentation instead of programming the whole time, which was I was very upset at the revelation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And then of course the even funnier part about this whole thing is that Suno AI music generation. Yeah. We generated a song said, I want to be Teach, I want to code, I want to dance, I don't want to go home. And we just had to just repeat and just say that over and over again in the club style. So that was me referencing a song I listened to 1,000 times. That makes sense.
Oh, I wanted to bring this up because I have a friend who is a doctor. This just got announced like today. They got a big $1 billion investment or whatever, but it's called Open Evidence. And apparently it's like OpenAI for medicine, but it doesn't hallucinate at least nearly as much, or it's like way, 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 way lower. And two separate doctors now have told me that it's like sweeping. People are using it all the time and it's pretty useful. And I wanted to shout that out because I trust this guy and he said he's tried ChatGPT and it's generally gives him something that he can't rely on, but this has. So clearly like maybe the broad LLMs are not going to be more slop trained or not working, but focused ones that are specific to a task could be more helpful or increase productivity.
That's been
I think that's a really good point that H-Route just brought up, right? Like this open medical whatever LLM, right? That's targeted towards medicine and for doctors to use for their diagnosis is great because instead of it having just like the general like information on the internet, like kind of the slop, it has more targeted information that will be useful for a doctor. And I think that's like the future of these LLMs, more targeted, more focused LLMs instead of just the general like foundation models. We're going to have these LLMs that are specialized for certain fields like law or medicine or even like programming. But I think programming is kind of like can be done by a lot of them. Because I know Anthropic is kind of like the big one for programming, and ChatGPT can do it. pretty much all of them can do it. But for like specialized fields like medicine, law, and I don't know, aviation or whatever, all these different fields, specialized LLMs will be significantly more useful because now these companies can just feed them their data or their documentation or their processes, and the LLM can really hone in like, oh, I have a question regarding how we do a certain thing. Tell them, okay, let me look through our database. Let me look through the medical information. Let me look all through this relevant information and give you the answer instead of just let me search the internet and see what someone on Reddit said. Actually, this is what a lot of companies like where I work for is that what they're doing. We're training our own LLMs using our own data so that we can better specialize and be more useful for our own context instead of just having an off-the-shelf foundation model like ChatGPT, which is definitely the future, at least in my opinion. But let's get back to what they were saying.
My theory for a while, I think I've said that on the...
They're not working, but focused ones that are specific to a task could be more helpful or increase productivity.
That's been my theory for a while. I think I've said that on the podcast, which is that, if trying to appeal to every single use case is so ridiculously hard, but it's so clear that many, many industries are not going to be successful by jamming ChatGPT in there. Doctors would appreciate, and again, I've talked to doctors, or again, my sister who's a nurse and there are already software programs that people in industries like a lawyer or a doctor use that help them gather information they need for a case or prep a case or do whatever. And these programs could be supercharged by having an AI system that can scan through 10,000 documents for them and like pull something up like that instantly, or to reframe it in a way that is relevant for a specific case. But obviously in these contexts, it's super important to get it right. And so if you have a company whose entire thing is about consolidating a bunch of medical data and presenting it in a format that is really helpful, and they figure out the logistics and litigation risks of all this stuff, that's where there's going to be a ton of value. And so that is already happening with law. I forget if I actually brought it up, but there's quite a few companies that are finding major success selling to law firms. And it's not ChatGPT and it's not Anthropic. It's companies that have, I think Bloomberg, I'm fairly certain has one of them that is like really successful, but it's just legal documentation and assistance. And their whole thing is like, they're not trying to write erotica for people. They're just doing the legal side. They have tons and tons of effort on just safeguarding to make sure that there aren't hallucinations around cases that don't exist. And I think every industry is going to have stuff like that. And this is why I'm actually curious your thought. I've always felt like not only because of the DeepSeek stuff that we mentioned earlier, where it's easy to use ChatGPT 5 to make your own model. On top of that, if you're spending $200 billion as ChatGPT to make the next model that's going to make everybody happy, you'll inevitably not.
Before they move on to their next point, I do think there's a lot of money to be made with AI, just because like the big companies like OpenAI and Google and Microsoft, they're losing billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on creating AI. But I think the things like Cursor or all these companies are integrating AI that have a big focus is AI, like a part of their business. They have other business, but part of that includes AI. They're going to be printing money because AI can supercharge your existing business. Say you have like a medical office, right? Now you can use AI to help you organize your clients better. Maybe have AI help schedule. Now these things are, instead of having someone spend 2 or 3 hours a week trying to schedule all the staff and work around every schedule, put it to the AI. AI does it in like 2 minutes and it's done. Now you just save tons of money and you have a lot of space freed up for that person to do other tasks. So you're kind of increasing your profits. So I think not like the big models, like the guys who run the big models might not be making money. But I think the guys who are profiting from those models and who are using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude to run their businesses or integrate them into their businesses will be able to actually gain a lot of profit from that. So I do think that if you are someone who has a small business or a startup or something, really think deeply about including AI in that business and seeing how you can include, not just like for sake of saying, oh yeah, powered by AI or we include AI, but seeing how you can drive deep value from having AI included in your business. But back to video.
Not make everybody happy. $200 billion as ChatGPT to make the next model that's going to make everybody happy. You'll inevitably not make everybody happy. Every industry is going to have its own needs and challenges, and you're spending the most money of anybody versus a company that comes in with $100 million and makes something that's just really, really incredible for, I don't know, truck drivers or whatever, like a specific industry.
Exactly
and so I have a hard time believing that the profit is going to come from the foundation models. Here's what you think.
Here's the thing is, first I'll tell a quick story. For the last year, I've been having some voice problems. Turns out I have muscle tension dysphonia, which means I just have, throat keeps swelling for some odd reason. And during that, I went to many doctors and no doctor was able to figure it out. And so I ChatGPT'd and ChatGPT figured it out. they're really it's really good. And then I went to a doctor and he's like, that's it, that is the one. And so
That's
you know,
crazy.
It's crazy when you
That is a
have
crazy thing to hear, actually.
That's
well,
kinda
when you have
crazy.
like a medical condition and you realize that doctors aren't like, they're like a detective with varying degrees of ability, and that you like maybe they'll be able to solve your case. They don't just like solve every problem. Every doctor is sort of like making an educated guess based on what they know, and you might literally need to go to 20 and the 20th.
Yes.
Or if you have a serious medical procedure like operating on cancer, that you'll have one doctor say, yeah, we could operate. We think this is going to save your life. And another says, don't really know. And another says that will definitely kill you. And all three are the most qualified doctors in the state. And it's like, what, right?
Just an episode of House you just described.
Yes. And this happens anybody with a chronic condition knows this. Anybody who's had to do a major surgery knows this. It's rare that there's this complete consensus with the medical industry.
Honestly, if you've had a conversation longer than 30 minutes with any doctor, you find this out. It's like, this is
More
not
art than
as all
science.
refined as I thought it would
That's
be.
that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to get on AI for valid reasons. But at the same time, it's like, you shouldn't presume that the systems we have are some flawless bastion. Like, you shouldn't assume that every lawyer is just fucking acing it every time. So no, they absolutely are not. You shouldn't assume every doctor is acing this. It's really hard to do this. And if you have a tool that you can talk to that can synthesize the entirety of all the information available in a few seconds, and you use that to augment smart humans, that's where I think it'd be really positive.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, what makes these AIs really useful is not just that they know information about one subject, but they know information about everything. And so they can really put that data together and give a really good response. Not a really good response, but a response that can help you investigate more and learn more instead of limited to what one doctor knows or what one professional knows. You have pretty much all the professionals. You have all that information. And say, like, for example, Prime brought up his throat issue. Instead of him just talking to a doctor and the doctor's like, maybe it's a sore throat, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, right? He did research himself. He asked ChatGPT what it thought it was. And so ChatGPT has all that case information, all that medical information, potential cases, potential issues, if I could speak English. And then he gave him a potential response. And then when Prime brought that up to his doctor, the doctor said, yeah, let's investigate that more. Let's look at that issue. Maybe it's that issue. That could be what it is. But if he didn't have that AI there to tell him this is a potential issue, he might have to go to another 10 doctors before he figure out what exactly is the issue. So having the AI can supercharge things and make things easier for a user to understand what's going on in their life, or how can I benefit from a certain thing, or what's happening with me. So AI can have a really powerful impact in that regard.
So I'm actually on board for this whole doctor thing. I don't know how much money it would take and all that, or if the foundational models can't just do the things it needs to do anyways. Like if they will be good enough just to be able to do it.
ChatGPT can just be your doctor eventually, you know.
As opposed to like having a specific industry that's only surrounded with one model. Maybe there's some fine tuning, some other techniques that they can do to make it better. Okay. So I have no like strong opinion whether that's the future, or is it just ChatGPT gobbles them all up because it has monopoly amount of money on stuff, and so it's just like I win everything because I have enough information. But at the end of the day, it's really about the people who use it. I don't want to just have ChatGPT tell me my problem. I'd much rather know what it is, go to a couple doctors and see what they have to say, and then bounce off what I've been told and see like where it can be, because you just never know. I've heard just craziest stories about exactly these doctor things where one person figured it out and it was the most completely opposite thing that even ChatGPT couldn't get. And so is there a lot of money in it? Probably a ton of money if you can really solve it.
Okay, that's what I want to talk about then. I want to go.
Yeah, that was a really good video. I think it was really insightful just to get the insight of Prime and the Lemonade cast. But if you like this video format, or if you have anything to say in the comments, or any questions, or even if you disagree with some of the things I've said or some of my takes, leave in the comments. I really love to see what you guys think about this AI and how can AI benefit us, or even do you think it's a danger having this much potential responses? Maybe it could misdirect doctors or something. I love to see all your thoughts and responses in the comments below. But that's it for me, and peace out.